Hey, come here. I want to show you something. It's right over here. Come here. It's this right here. And you might look at this and think this is an unassuming section of fence by an unassuming section of road, but there's a secret that is keeping you safer anytime that you drive on this road on your way to Buena Vista. You see, cars themselves have actually gotten a lot safer in general in the last 50 years. We're way better at building things that crash well and protect you in the event of a car crash. But the best way to be safe in a car crash is just to never get into one in the first place, and that's what this fence does. In Colorado, every year there are thousands of collisions with vehicles and wildlife. They often have tragic outcomes, not just for wildlife, but for people too. The good news is we just passed legislation in Colorado that's gonna help build more of these. And the benefits of these wildlife crossings and fences go way beyond just protecting wildlife, but into ecological resilience. And we're gonna talk all about that, and to find out about it, I talked to one of WRA's experts who's been working on this problem for years in Colorado. And I found out that with more funding, Colorado could be doing even more to protect wildlife. Let's talk about how. Welcome back to our series on conservation funding in the West. We're exploring different ways that we can fund protecting wildlife, ecosystems, and the communities of the West. On today's episode, we're talking about wildlife crossings.
My name is John Holst. I am a senior policy advisor in the Western Lands Program for Western Resource Advocates.
John says the Coloradans need to be paying more attention to the ways that wildlife and vehicles interact.
It's hard to overstate how significant it is. According to roadkill data from CDOT, the Department of Transportation, over 7,700 animals, mostly mule deer, were killed by vehicles across the state in 2025 alone. In addition, I've seen hard numbers from the insurance industry indicating that the number of claims filed for wildlife vehicle collisions is really closer to 9,000 per year. So a lot of animals are getting hit on the highway. Unfortunately, between 2010 and 2025, these collisions resulted in 52 human fatalities and over 5,500 injuries. Not only are these accidents really horrible and tragic from a human standpoint, but they also have real impacts on Colorado's economy. There's a study by Montana State University that estimates the annual cost of wildlife vehicle collisions in Colorado at $321 million, the highest of any state across the West.
Yeah, looks like it's just a ding. There's no reason to get the insurance companies involved.
Well, I should still take down your information, though.
Really?
That would...
Not only is hitting animals really dangerous for you, but it's also really expensive for you, and I'm willing to bet it costs more than you think it does.
Most of our collisions are mule deer, and the average cost of hitting a mule deer, believe it or not, exceeds $23,000. So it's quite expensive in terms of vehicle repairs and injuries.
There's a risk to life if you hit an animal, there's a risk financially if you hit an animal, and there's also an environmental impact from hitting animals. It is not good to just be having deer get hit by cars all the time.
In addition to the direct mortality caused from collisions, roads fragment habitat and impair wildlife movement. Wildlife, especially migratory ungulates like deer, elk, and pronghorn that we have in Colorado, need to move relatively freely across the landscape to access the resources that they need to survive. All year long. Colorado in particular, we have a lot of elevational migrations for big game. They basically summer in the high country and winter down in the mountain valleys. The studies have shown that most wildlife increasingly avoid roads as traffic volumes increase, to the point that at really high traffic volume, roads can become an impenetrable barrier to wildlife movement. In his book, Crossings, Ben Goldfarb appropriately uses the term, quote, moving fence to describe the fence-like barrier that to wildlife movements caused by constant streams of traffic on high volume roads.
Come on, while we have the chance. Gasping in the fumes, we gambled our lives trying to get through the traffic.
That moving fence is one of the larger stressors that we have on wildlife as humans. Wildlife are resilient and they can actually endure a lot, but John says when there's other stressors, like drought, for example, that vehicle collisions can be the thing that pushes a population into decline.
Ultimately, this habitat fragmentation can decrease the carrying capacity of the landscape to support really large, robust wildlife populations, and also inhibits wildlife's ability to move across the landscape to adapt to things like climate change. There is, it got to the point in some Western Colorado populations where Colorado Parks and Wildlife years ago kind of surveyed all of their biologists as well as the public and tried to identify those things limiting mule deer populations. And roadkill was actually identified as one of the main things that Parks and Wildlife needed to address declining mule deer populations.
Wildlife managers think of a concept called compensatory mortality when they're thinking about how bad a certain thing is for a wildlife population. John explains what that is.
Compensatory mortality is essentially a way to suggest that there's a certain number of mule deer that are frankly going to die each year, based on there not being enough food to eat, starvation, predation, other types of things. So if one type of mortality doesn't get a percentage of the population, I'm really oversimplifying, but if one type of mortality doesn't get a percentage of the population, another type of mortality is going to get them. So more or less, there's a certain number of mule deer that aren't going to make it through the year.
So by itself, vehicle collisions aren't going to dramatically decrease or increase mule deer populations, but there's a catch.
Additive mortality means that it's a specific source of mortality that's actually going to increase the overall number of mule deer that are going to die. So you're no longer sort of have this overall mortality rate for the population, but you're actually adding to that because the population is stressed for some reason, and you're more or less going to increase the number of deer that die within a particular geographic region that year.
I got you. So what you're saying is like there's like a to put it in financial terms, there's like a black level where it's fine, like we're still in the black, and then we can push ourselves into the red when we have these other stressors that cause more vehicle collisions and decrease the population.
Yeah, and it could be disease, it could be a number of other things, but if you have vehicle collisions on top of, poor habitat conditions, disease and other things, then you could definitely be going into the red.
Don't be a killer car.
The good news is there's a way around this, where we can build our roads in a way that don't cause vehicle collisions, allow us to preserve migration corridors, and protect the resilience of our wildlife. And that's through wildlife crossings, kind of like this tunnel that I'm in right now.
So wildlife crossings, are structures built either over or underneath the road to separate wildlife movements from vehicle traffic to provide safe passage for both wildlife and people. So it's really designed to really segregate the traffic from wildlife movement.
Above me is Highway 285, a road that I drive all the time to get in and out of the Arkansas Valley, and this crossing is helping to protect me and you if you drive on this road. Now, there's a couple of ways to build wildlife crossings. You can build them like this, a tunnel that goes under the road, or you can build an overpass that goes over the road. But there's one kind of question that I had, and that's, how do I get a deer to use a tunnel or a bridge?
To be effective, they really need to be combined with wildlife fencing to help channel wildlife to the crossing structures. And if constructed correctly, that system of crossing structures and wildlife fencing, connects habitat on both sides of the highway, so it's great for wildlife, but it also reduces wildlife vehicle collisions by 90% or more based on monitoring of structures that we've done across Colorado thus far.
Now, when combined with fencing, these wildlife crossings are very effective. And that 90% figure comes from a section of road near Kremling, where I drive to and from all the time on my way to fishing spots. And we can also be incredibly precise with where we build these crossings.
We have these migrations that's basically, for these deer that winter down in New Mexico, and they migrate through like 4 or 5 jurisdictions, private lands, tribal lands, state of New Mexico lands, state of Colorado lands. on up to federal land, BLM lands and Forest Service lands to summer in the high San Juans.
John told me about this specific project with the Southern Ute Indian tribe near Chimney Rock in Durango, Colorado, and he showed me how they were able to use very specific data to know exactly where to put this crossing.
And when when the tribe first did this, big kudos to the Southern Ute Indian tribe and Aaron Johnson. We didn't know how useful that migration information would be, but coincidentally, this work with the Transportation Alliance trying to use the best available science to cite where crossing structures should go based on the number of wildlife vehicle collisions and where animals are actually migrating. So we took CDOT's data to show roadkill information on Highway 160, and then we plotted it with the tribe's migration data showing the highest density migration movement areas and the intersection with the number of vehicle collisions. Like the highest vehicle collisions, like bam, it was like X marks the spot of like, this is where you need to put a wildlife crossing structure. And that's exactly where CDOT put the wildlife overpass and underpass on Highway 160 there by Chimney Rock. And I can send you those maps, but they're fascinating to look at because you're just like, holy cow, this totally makes sense.
Wildlife crossings reduce collisions on this section of road by 60%. Now, I'm not talking just about animal-vehicle collisions. I'm talking about all accidents, meaning there were 60% fewer accidents on this stretch of road outside Durango. That is an incredible number. John actually hunts some of the animals that go through that same corridor, and he said that these migration routes are not replaceable. They're somewhat of a family heirloom for the deer that travel on them.
And they literally migrate, like the same family groups migrate across the same location every year. And then their offspring migrate across that same location every year. So these have been handed down, these migration routes, from generation to generation to generation. And so it's crazy to think about, like, how long some of these migrations have been going on and how important they are for animals to actually access what they need. Because if you sever that migration, even for one generation, right? You know, whatever happens, traffic volumes get too high, somebody builds a fence, and so there's a generation that can't migrate, that's lost forever. And the impacts of the population then no longer being able to access those resources on the other side of the road, that's going to trickle down to, population dynamics and what's going to happen with that population. But it's crazy to think about, and it really gives you a lot of incentive to, like, we need to conserve these pinch points, are the most important areas where these animals are moving across the highway.
And again, not only does this project preserve a critical migration corridor for local wildlife, it reduces vehicle collisions by 60%. And wildlife crossings all across the West have similar rates of effectiveness. So the question is, if we're making roads that much safer, why aren't these things everywhere?
So they're really expensive. A recent survey of over 500 transportation agency officials identified funding as the #1 barrier to investing in more wildlife crossing structures. To give you a couple examples, a small underpass costs around $1 million, while larger structures like the big one recently constructed, the Greenland Overpass on I-25, which spans 6 lanes of traffic.
The largest wildlife overpass in North America is now complete. In Douglas County, CDOT says construction is done in Greenland near Larkspur and open for wildlife. The overpass spans 6 lanes of interstate traffic, connecting 39,000 acres of habitat on both sides of I-25.
That costs around $30 million. So the upfront cost is really a substantial barrier.
We've already discussed how they protect vehicles, wildlife, and ecosystems, but they can also preserve economic value over time.
Despite that upfront cost, some recent studies show significant cost savings over the lifespan of crossing structures. Remember, like bridges, these structures last a really long time, like up to 75 years. And over that time period, there can be savings of hundreds of thousands of dollars each year in reduced accident rates. One study in Washington State showed a savings of over $400,000 a year at some crossing structures. Another study in Utah showed a net savings of $15 million over the lifespan of a crossing structure. So we'll see similar savings to that here in Colorado as we construct more of these structures.
We're following a bill just introduced that looks at reducing wildlife vehicle collisions across the state. Now, the bill aims to build more wildlife crossings and safety infrastructure and also reduce these kinds of collisions by 90%.
In 2026, WRA, alongside partners like Pew Charitable Trust and several legislative champions, was able to pass Senate Bill 26-141, which was a funding measure for wildlife crossings in Colorado. And this bill was a great start on making some of these crossing stories that we're talking about more prevalent throughout our state. The new legislation has a lot of runway to help build more of these wildlife crossings.
So the new bill is awesome, frankly. I mean, it's expected to raise between $4 and $8 million a year. And while that doesn't sound like a tremendous amount when you're talking about a structure that might cost $30 million, a couple of things to keep in mind, I guess, is this is the first dedicated annual funding stream for building wildlife crossing structures and supporting infrastructure in Colorado. And, it's actually, believe it or not, the largest dedicated state funding mechanism for wildlife crossings in the entire country. So even though it's just $4 to $8 million, doesn't sound like a tremendous amount of money, it's a big, big deal. And even better, over the past 5 years, Colorado has been really successful at leveraging every state dollar invested to unlock about $4 federal dollars for crossing infrastructure. So that means that $4 to $8 million from the new law of state money could unlock, 16 to 32 million of additional investment in Colorado. So a significant amount of money going toward wildlife crossing infrastructure.
That's the good news. We're making progress on funding this infrastructure and getting it built where it's most needed. But every story has a catch, and there's not all good news. So what's the bad news? And that's simply the cost. You've heard us say it before, we still need more money.
It's a good start. I mean, building the crossings and the fencing along the highway will definitely reduce wildlife vehicle collisions, but it's not enough really to conserve wildlife movements and landscape scale seasonal migrations for animals like mule deer, elk, and other wildlife over the long term. One of the great things about the new law is that it recognizes that in order for wildlife crossings to stay functional over the long term, there needs to be a concerted effort to work with landowners and local governments to ensure that high-density development doesn't encroach on either side of the crossing structures to the point that it restricts wildlife's ability to use them. In addition to the crossing structures, the new law specifically provides funding for wildlife movement corridor conservation to address that issue. And we've begun at WRA working with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, CDOT, other state agencies, and local governments to develop a strategy for how to smartly invest in landscape scale corridor conservation. So the new law is really, if you think about it, it's just seed money for this effort. We estimate that Colorado still needs over $100 million in annual recurring funding to safeguard open lands, wild places, and wildlife migrations from urban sprawl and all the other types of development we're seeing in Colorado. So we have a great start, but there's still a long way to go.
Give wildlife managers the resources they need, and what they can do to protect people, wildlife, and ecosystems is incredible. And that's really the story of wildlife crossings. The primary barrier to protecting wildlife usually isn't public interest or available science, it's funding to actually get these measures on the ground where they're needed. And that's what we're trying to fix at WRA through measures like SB 141, but also through more concerted efforts to build up conservation finance within Colorado. These projects are expensive, and while important, they often get ignored without a stable and dedicated source of funding to make sure that they happen. When we're talking about needing sustained forces of conservation funding, this is what we're talking about. A pot of money specifically put aside for funding win-win projects like this that protect people, wildlife, and everything that we love about Colorado, and wildlife crossings is really just the perfect example of that. It makes you safer, it makes wildlife safer, and it's a great investment for the money that we have to put into it. Stay tuned for the next episode where we talk about more ways that we can use conservation finance to help protect Colorado. Lastly, we'd like to thank the sponsors who support our work. Our premier sponsor is Kind Design. Our signature sponsors are Sweep, Denver Water, Scarpa, Soul Up, and Torch Clean Energy. Our supporting sponsors are Group Forkin Engineering, Megafauna River Company, and BSW Wealth Partners.